It is so good to be back, my friends. I have a tale to tell before the tavern closes tonight. I have come a very long way and seen so many places. I have heard many stories, and I am happy to be here now to share them with you. So, gather round. Tonight we will speak of a warrior, a knight, a wandering hero. She was born in the kingdom of Marianne, back in the days when it was a kingdom. She was a paladin, a victor of the Tournament of Trees, who used her reward of knighthood to serve the Abbey of Saint Isabel. They called her Dame Giselle of Marianne. The Abbey of Saint Isabel is an interesting one. Where some monasteries and abbeys take vows of silence or vows of merriment to throw lavish gatherings almost every day of the year, the Abbey of Saint Isabel took an oath of study. They vowed to their 5 divines to research the animals and monsters of the world. The abbey itself is massive and home to hundreds of beasts in pens. They spend their days feeding these creatures, watching them, taking notes on their behaviors. People often claim that the abbey has one of every animal and monster in the world. However, the monks told me that the collection is far from complete. Within the abbey grounds are dragons, monsters, animals, fish, and to walk from one end to the other takes quite a long time. Dame Giselle chose this abbey as she had been raised as a beast hunter. Fighting monsters was a skill she had developed over years of life, and she figured eventually the monsters would break free and the monks would need an accomplished hunter to protect them. She would spend the mornings in prayer, praying to the divines of Telor, Marianne, Steiner, Wolvera, and Helene. As the sun rose, she would patrol the grounds, watching the monks care for the beasts, making sure no threat loomed on the horizon. Her eyes always lingered on the pens that held the monsters. The devilish yellow eyes of dragons and the strange fangs of chimeric beasts made her uneasy. She couldn't understand why the monks would bother caring for such evil creatures. She was a hunter, and as such she did have a solid base of knowledge. She knew the categories of beasts: draconic creatures with scales and magical powers, chimeric monsters who have the traits of multiple animals, mutants of incredible size and strange gifts, insects with their many eyes and legs, undead with their rotting bodies and diseased air, constructs made of worldly elements created by both mages and brought to life by the very will of the land. She knew how to kill them, and her hand always clung to her sword hilt as she would watch the monks feed the creatures, calm their rages, even pet certain beasts. It was puzzling to her that the monks would offer such kindness to creatures capable of incredible destruction, building them each an enclosure that fits their unique needs. It was a mercy that these creatures did not deserve, in her eyes. Dragons, drakes, minotaurs, griffins, demons, Wuldarin, werewolves, trolls, tundra spiders, Hirlatora, zombies, striga, elemental spirits, golems, all of these creatures were capable of incredible violence, and the monks would still tell her to stay her hand when a dragon began to spew flame in a tantrum. No matter the danger, the monks always greeted the beasts with calm and tact. Every few weeks, new creatures would arrive, often captured in areas where they were dealing too much damage, or found wounded out in the Marianne woods. Giselle would watch with disdain and unease. The monks would spend weeks attempting to curry the favor of beasts, attempting to calm their rages and help them settle into their new homes. And in that period they were often at their most dangerous. Giselle grew to hate her chosen posting. The monks were kind enough. The hours spent in prayer were good for her soul. The abbey itself was beautiful as they grew trees and plants from all over Lorelei. However, at night, the slightest stirring of beasts set her teeth on edge. One winter night, when the rain had turned to snow and had begun to coat the Abbey of St. Isabel in a blanket of frost and ice, Giselle had called it an early evening. She sat in her room, unbraiding her long black hair just to re-braid it, when a hellish roar erupted from the south side of the Abbey campus. She grabbed her poleaxe and ran, wearing only her gambeson and the few pieces of plate she had not yet removed. The roar was coming from the south, but it was soon a resounding cry. Monsters to the east, west, and north, all panicking and raging. When she finally saw what was causing the commotion, it was far too late. A bandit crew had begun a raid on the Abbey. However, seemingly no one had told them what to expect within these walls. They had destroyed several buildings, accidentally freeing many creatures. Giselle rammed her shoulder into one of the bandits, sending him to the ground before engaging his allies with her long weapon. She sent wide swings and thrusts to keep them at bay, her boot planted firmly on the fallen bandit's back to keep him down. One of them finally got brave enough to attempt an attack, but Giselle caught his blade with the haft of her weapon and proceeded to finish him off with the beak. Another rushed in, and Giselle managed to strike him with the haft of the pole hard enough to disorient him. This was a losing battle. Too many bandits and not enough allies. Giselle watched as the monsters who had broken free began to kill any bandit who stood in their way, escaping into the wilds. She tried her best to keep track of the directions they were fleeing in, but felt a heavy impact on the back of her head and passed out. Giselle awoke after the rout. The bandits had fled after securing whatever modest loot they could reasonably sell, and the monks had gone to collect their fallen knight. As she opened her eyes, she saw the most beautiful woman, cradling her head as she prayed. The monk's lips moved deftly as light danced around her fingertips. Giselle had never seen a more beautiful person, and as her eyes fluttered awake, the monk woman's eyes met hers. A silent moment occurred before the monk nodded and dropped Giselle's body from her lap, her head hitting the wooden floor as she was unceremoniously thrown down. Dame Giselle demanded to know why the young woman did that, and the monk just sighed. She was frustrated that Giselle had allowed the monsters to escape. Many are wounded or cannot survive in the wild anymore. The knight had been so focused on fighting an overwhelming enemy that she ignored the greatest tool she had. The monsters could have helped win the day. A few days passed as Giselle still healed. The monks got to work taking note of any and all beasts that went missing. Giselle had eventually managed to her feet, and when the monks told her the damage that was done, she was certain that her new task was to go hunt and kill all monsters that had escaped. Of course, she was wrong. The monks assigned Dame Giselle Desmarienne to go recapture and bring the beasts home, and to make sure that she had the tools needed and didn't die along the way, they sent a monk with her. Giselle gathered her armor, her sword, her poleaxe, and got her mare ready for the long weeks ahead. However, when she turned to see the monk that would be accompanying her, of course, it was the beautiful woman who hated Giselle's guts. The two rode in silence at first, hours of awkward, grating quiet, before the monk gave Giselle her name, Eolitha, meaning whirlwind in one of the many languages of the eastern kingdoms. Giselle apologized for not asking sooner, but Eolitha simply shrugged. She didn't expect a brute to care much for manners. Giselle attempted to explain herself, but it seemed as though this journey was destined to be torture at the hands of a beautiful woman who hated her. They finally found proof of one of the beasts a few long steps away from the abbey. Seemingly something that could fly was having a rather hard time doing so, as the tops of trees in the forest had been crushed and snapped as though something couldn't ascend past them. The two rode through the thicket, watching the branches, staring at the dirt, looking for any clue as to what particular beast they were on the tail of. They came to a halt, and stared at a print left in the soft ground after the beast came crashing down. Dragon. Giselle removed her sword from her belt and looked at Eolitha. The hunter knew that slaying a dragon required blunt force or a ranged weapon. As she only had her poleaxe, that would have to do. Dragon's scale is nearly unbreakable, so to kill one, a hunter must crack the scales, not cut through them. Eolitha rolled her eyes and shrugged, declaring that if Giselle's plan is to kill the creature, she wouldn't get involved. They tracked forward, through the brush, further, soon hearing the creature groaning in frustration. Giselle dismounted her steed and untied her polearm from the saddle. Eolitha dismounted and sat beside a nearby elm tree. With a dismissive wave of her hand, Giselle abandoned the monk and pressed onward. The large green beast, nearly 27 hands tall and 42 hands in length, was trudging through the brush. If it could not fly, it would simply have to walk. Each step crushed branches, and as it walked, the trees would shake just a bit. Giselle could see it, its dull green scales hiding it well against the foliage. The rain was gentle at the moment, but it added a shimmer to each scale that made the dragon hard to fully define at a distance. Giselle lifted her weapon and took a deep breath. She had fought dragons before. They were not a new threat. However, they were still dangerous. With one swipe of its talons, it could tear her armor. With a moment of its fiery breath, she would be gone. Its tail, its teeth, its claws, its magic, everything made this beast a threat. Giselle turned around to see Eolitha sitting patiently, not a shred of concern on her face. The knight relented, setting the weapon aside and gesturing for the monk to try it her way. Eolitha reached into her bag and pulled a potion, pouring it over one of her palms. She approached the beast, fearlessly. When it heard her, it turned, roaring loudly, flames spewing from its maw into the air. However, she continued to walk towards it. Giselle looked on in fear as the dragon rushed towards the monk quickly. However, Eolitha didn't slow her walk. The great beast looked confused and stopped its rush, tail swaying as if it was not sure how to react to such a calm presence. Eolitha waved her hand in the air, and the dragon watched it before slowly laying down and falling asleep. Giselle was stunned. She asked what happened as Eolitha wiped the potion off of her palm. She explained that the aroma is extremely settling to draconic species, and watching her move her hand had set the creature at ease. The two led the creature home, and the monks helped it into its enclosure. Along the way, Eolitha taught Giselle many such interesting facts about dragons and monsters in general, little quirks in their behavior that made them easy to work with. Giselle couldn't believe what the monk was saying, but Eolitha reminded the knight that a monster is just an animal with a few extra gifts from the gods. So few behave in evil ways on purpose. And so it went. Town to town the two would wander, calming a troll by giving it a sack of gold to count, settling a griffin by mimicking its sounds, settling an undead by giving it items from its past, capturing a giant spider using sheep. Giselle had grown to understand and appreciate monsters further, and Eolitha had reluctantly grown to respect the knight's bravery, if nothing else. They had returned a great many of the beasts. Many were still free, and even today there are some they were not able to find again. However, there was one they knew the location of. An unusually large dragon, with dull brown scales and a particularly foul temper. 60 hands in length and 36 hands tall, she was of truly monstrous size. The dragoness had been spotted heading towards the mountains, so Giselle and Eolitha mounted their horses and headed for her. Along the road, the knight noticed that for the first time in their journey together, the monk was nervous. She asked what was the matter, and Eolitha just shrugged. This dragon had been hard to calm, hard to care for. The usual tricks and remedies didn't settle her down. There was a chance they wouldn't be able to recapture her. Giselle ruminated on that thought as they rode west. The monk had changed her. Once, not so long ago, so keen to slay great beasts, the knight wouldn't want to kill this dragon. But if left undisturbed in a part of the country she had never been to before, she could very easily be very dangerous to a great many people. At the end of a day of riding, they were getting ready to set up camp when on the horizon they saw black smoke rising in the distance. Giselle urged her horse into a run, her eyes trained on the stacks of smoke and shadow dancing on the distant breeze. Iolantha tried her best to keep up. When they arrived, they could hear screams, people fleeing their homes, the roaring of a dragon. Giselle instinctively untied her poleaxe and dismounted, running through the town towards the dragon's horrible sounds. Iolantha tried to call after her, but the knight was focused. In that moment, the young monk made a choice. She could follow her ally and make sure she didn't hurt the beast in any way that wasn't necessary. Or she could stay and aid the townsfolk who were in need of a healer. She decided to trust her friend. Through the town Giselle ran, past burning homes, through smoke and flame. When she finally saw the great beast, it was bellowing flame into the sky in triumph. Giselle's heart pounded as she ran towards it, eyes honed and weapon ready. A knight swears to fight for the innocent. This dragon was clearly harming innocents. It could not be allowed to carry on living. But a thought occurred to her. Was this dragon not innocent? What accountability could she hold this animal to? It needs to eat. It gets scared. These people were in its way and likely didn't treat it with a great deal of respect when they saw it on the horizon. The dragon swiped at Giselle, who in her fog failed to lift her weapon to defend herself. Its claw ripped through her helmet and sent it flying. Blood ran down the knight's cheek as she fell to the ground. She scrambled for her weapon, but the dragon had knocked it far away. Giselle had no special potions, no traps, no plan, no weapon. The beast paced around her as the knight struggled to her knees, the blood blinding one of her eyes. She tried to come up with a plan. She had killed dragons. She knew their behaviors. They ambush. They rush down their prey. But they don't flee from a fight unless they are losing. They lay their eggs in hand-carved caves. They collect objects. They mate for life. In that moment, Giselle had an idea. She called Iolantha's name and staggered to her feet. The monk heard her and came running. The dragon continued to walk its circle around the knight. As Iolantha arrived, she froze in fear. The dragon took notice and considered for a moment going after her, but its thought was interrupted as Giselle stumbled over to the young monk and kissed her. The chaos was silent. Only the crackling of flame could be heard as the two women embraced before the great beast. It stood, puzzled. Giselle turned to look at it, as the dragon slowly began to sulk away from the town. Dragons mate for life, and they don't kill creatures in front of their mates. Giselle had convinced it that her and the monk were dragons, with a single, powerful burst of emotion. The dragon left the town, continuing west until it found its own home again, its own mate, its own den. And Giselle did very much the same, returning home to her monastery with her love. The two of them still serve the Abbey of Saint Isobel, Giselle as its protector, but also as a tamer of creatures, and Iolantha as a healer, but no longer a member of the clergy. I met the two of them on the road, and they invited me back to the Abbey. It was stunning. Complicated enclosures personally designed to care for the beasts they contained. Beautiful plants sourced from all over the world to make their monsters feel at home. Giselle admitted that the Abbey was far from having one of every kind of monster in its care, but they were working on it. I was taken by that place. It was so beautiful and tranquil, a monument to mercy and understanding. Giselle herself has not killed a monster in a very long time, and with her tactical mind has refined the skills with which the monks calm and capture certain beasts. Iolantha is very proud of her wife, although maintains her critical nature, claiming it encourages Giselle to always fight to be better than she was when she was young. I tell you this story not because of some grand moral. I do not believe that I am knowledgeable enough to claim that the clans should coexist with monsters, nor do I think I should make such claims. I tell you this story because I believe it shows that people can change, we can learn, and we can grow into better people than we ever were before. I apologize for my recent absence. I went to go learn some new stories and follow up on older ones. Next we meet, I will tell you of the first spellcaster to ever harness the light of the stars, the mage who would change magic forever, for the world we live in now. I will tell you of the great threat that inspired them to learn something so foreign. Until then, I thank you all for being here tonight. I thank my band, as always. I have a tome of tales from every nation to share with you all. I have seen many monsters, many heroes. I have learned of the magic offered by the gods and the magic humans can conjure for themselves. I have seen warfare, and I have tales of peace. I cannot wait to tell them all to you. Good night, and thank you. Legends of Lorelei is an immersive, fantasy fiction audio drama produced by Livewire Stories. This show is written and produced by Gwen Fullman. The music you heard in this episode was composed and performed by Gwen Fullman. The Bard is played by Gwen Fullman. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, please consider subscribing to our Patreon at Livewire Multimedia Stories to receive episodes a week early for only $2 a month. You will also receive updates on our projects, like the tabletop role-playing games or short films we've been working on. Check out our website at livewiretabletop.wixsite.com/livewire. Subscribe to us on YouTube, or join our Discord server in the description below. The best way you can support us is to show this to a friend. Thank you.